So we'll transition now to our next session. What is your type? Digital Health Technologies has got diabetes covered. We'll open the session with a presentation from Howard Look, President CEO at Tidepool.
Thank you so much for having me here. It's really an honor to be here for this important topic. My name is Howard Look. I'm the founder and CEO of Tidepool, and I'll tell you a little bit about our organization in just a second. I'm going to do a 10 to 15 minute rapid journey through the regulatory process that ended up with a tiny little company, Tidepool, with about 10 employees at the time, getting to a 501c as a 501c3 nonprofit, getting to a 510K clearance for an automated insulin delivery system. So backing up a little, I'm sure there are lots of folks here that understand what diabetes, and in particular insulin-dependent diabetes, is all about. But just as a quick note for folks who may not be aware, insulin-dependent diabetes is a really challenging disease to manage, and that's because insulin is a really challenging drug. It's a hormone that helps bring your blood sugar down, but it also can be potentially deadly, even if you take a little bit too much. And so some of the challenges of managing diabetes with insulin are that if you don't take enough, your blood sugar rises, and that can lead to long-term complications. And I've listed a few of them here, and they're not fun at all. And if you take even a little bit too much insulin, it can lead to acute challenges like seizures and comas, and in the worst case scenario, an overdose can lead to death. So you would think that with such a challenge, there would be a vibrant, thriving ecosystem to help manage it. But it actually turns out to be even more challenging than just being about insulin and carbohydrates. There's a great article that I encourage you to take a look at that Diatribe published a few years ago called The 42 Factors That Affect Blood Glucose. They've actually since upped the number. I think it's closer to 60 now. But the article goes into all kinds of great detail about how challenging it is to manage diabetes. Now, at Tidepool, we saw this very similar to the challenge for those that remember when digital cameras first came out. There's all this data, there's how much insulin you took, there's how much blood glucose you took. If you remember back when digital cameras first came out, you had to use the software that came with the camera in order to get the pictures out of the camera. But at least they all used JPEG as a file format. So you could send the picture to grandma, and grandma could see the picture using any JPEG viewer. But with diabetes devices, you not only had to use the software that came with the device to get the data out, you had to use the software that came with the device to look at the data. So that's a really big challenge if you're living with diabetes. It means that you have to use different software for your insulin pump, and different software for your blood glucose meter, and different software for your continuous glucose monitor. And we just thought that wasn't okay. So back in 2013, we were founded. We made a crazy, wonderful decision to be a 501c3 nonprofit. We're also very proud that we're radically transparent, and I'll share our website at the very end so you can see all of the things that we share back with the community. And one of the reasons I love Dime is that it's very much aligned with how we think about sharing all these incredible resources to make it easier for innovators to come up with new innovative health technologies. And we also, as a nonprofit, feel very strongly that we are stewards of the patient's data, and we feel very strongly that patients own their own data. So patient-generated health data is just table stakes for us. We absolutely believe that patients should be involved at every phase of the process, both in terms of research and in terms of their own care. Now, at this conference, I know there's a lot of regulatory nerds in the audience like me, and so if our name is familiar, it's probably because you heard of us when the FDA kicked off the FDA pre-cert program back in 2017. We were one of the 9 companies that were selected. I'm pretty proud of this because at the time we had about 10 employees. I used to joke that the other companies would bring more lawyers to the pre-cert meetings than we had employees, and that's not too far from the truth. But you can see we were, as a tiny little company, alongside some of the heavyweights in the digital health revolution, like Apple and Johnson & Johnson and Samsung and Fitbit, and that was pretty cool. But the thing that's notable about this is we were the only 501c3 nonprofit and the only open source company that was part of the pre-cert program. And that was pretty amazing because it meant when it came time to discuss with the FDA example projects, Apple's not going to talk about future products. Samsung's not going to talk about future products, but as a radically transparent nonprofit, we said, sure, we'd love to talk about what we're up to. And so we ended up having all of the other companies helping us improve our quality system and helping us think through how the pre-cert program would work using our products as examples. So that was really great for us. So what we've ended up with is an ecosystem of products. We started with the Tidepool data platform in the middle, which is a web, mobile, and cloud platform that allows people living with diabetes to see all of their data in one place. It's a universal system that allows you to see all of your diabetes data, whether it's insulin data from an insulin pump or a connected insulin pen, or from a blood glucose meter or a continuous glucose monitor. We support nearly every device that's in use in the US at this point, and we keep adding new devices as they become available. And that's been available in various forms since 2013, but we've kept improving it. And in fact, the pandemic was really a big forcing function for us to add new enterprise features because there were so many people who couldn't go see their primary care physician or their endocrinologist in person. We became very popular during the pandemic. And then we had enterprises saying, hey, we'd really like you to add single sign-on. We'd like you to add EHR integration. We'd like you to add population health management tools. And so we did all that during the pandemic and ended up with an enterprise software tier called Tidepool Plus. And then the final thing that I'll spend the rest of my time talking about is our mobile app called Tidepool Loop. And this is an automated insulin delivery system that reads data from a continuous glucose monitor and controls over Bluetooth an insulin pump to help automate the very challenging process of managing diabetes with insulin. Now, backing up for a second, I mentioned we really went in deep with the FDA. This is one of my favorite slides to show because for reasons I don't understand, I think a lot of people have never actually read the text in the red box. When we got started in 2013, the software guidance document that was active had been written before the internet existed. And it kind of made no sense for the kind of thing we were trying to do. And so we went and we met with the agency and they were fabulous. We said, hey, we saw this box that says you can use an alternate approach as long as it satisfies the requirements. And the guidance document doesn't talk about all the things that we would like to do. So we showed them what we wanted to do. We said, hey, we're going to keep our quality system in Google Docs. Well, how are you going to do digital signatures? Well, let us show you how we'll do digital signatures using Google Docs. We said we want to run agile software sprints, and we're going to use Jira. And at the time, it was actually Trello, and then we switched to Jira to manage all the things that are happening in the sprints. Well, how are you going to maintain a design history file using Jira? Well, let us show you that. We said, hey, you know, the way most companies do verification and validation seems kind of old school to us. In the modern software development world, everybody uses test automation and continuous integration systems like Ghost Inspector and Circle CI. And what we're going to do is we're going to build automated test suites so that with every single software change, we can run hundreds, which is turned into thousands, which is turned into tens of thousands of tests so that we know that our software is working as designed. And you know, the thing that I love to say is when you combine agile processes with modern tools is you get iteration for the win. And if you look at how modern software development happens, modern software development companies are able to deliver very, very high quality software that meets the user's needs very, very safely by iterating early and often. And that was one of the great things that I think the goal of the pre-cert program was to enable this. And it's a topic for another day on hopefully we can resurrect the pre-cert program and get Congress to do what needs to happen to allow the FDA to put it into place. But we still very much believe in all the principles that were discussed during that program. Now, also during that time, the agency should get huge credit for rolling out this interoperability program. And so for diabetes devices, what this meant is the agency said, hey, it makes no sense for us to try to review all of these closed loop insulin delivery systems as big systems, and we'd like to review the components of the system individually. And as a matter of fact, dear industry, said the FDA, if you follow this pathway, we're going to take these to a class 2 510K pathway instead of the class 3 PMA pathway. So this was a really incredible gift from the FDA, specifically the diabetes branch within CDRH, to the diabetes industry. Now, we took advantage of this. We went to the agency and said, hey, we really want to do this. There are these wonderful open source systems and we want to do this. Unfortunately, the rest of industry hasn't yet followed suit and created truly interoperable plug-and-play systems. And this is a constant nudge that the FDA last weekend at the American Diabetes Association conference, Deanna Busalas, who was actually our lead reviewer, very openly said, dear industry, we want you to be taking advantage of these pathways as they were intended to create truly interoperable systems. So we did it. We submitted Tidepool Loop, which started life as a patient led initiative in the do-it-yourself community. And we brought the do-it-yourself version of Loop to the agency. And again, great credit to the agency, because what they said to us is, hey, this system is currently in use by thousands of people in its open source form. We love real world evidence. That was what the diabetes branch said to us. We love real world evidence. So if you bring to us real world evidence based on people who are actually using the system in the open source world, we will consider that as part of your 510K, which is just an amazing thing for the agency to say to us. So we did that. In collaboration with the Jabe Center for Health Research and funded by the Helmsley Charitable Trust, we ran the Do-It-Yourself Loop observational study. And this slide gives you a sense of how big and wonderful the diabetes community is, and particularly the do-it-yourself community. This slide is showing the number of days of data that were part of this study. And I've compared it here. At the time, there were 3 other automated insulin delivery systems on the market. I won't say the manufacturers because it's not important. And you can see the size of their pivotal trials. And compare that to the size of the DIY Loop observational study. In fact, if you add up all the days studied in the regulatory trials from the systems that were available at the time, add it all up, and then multiply by 3, that's how much data we submitted as part of our observational study to the agency. So it was really incredible. For those who don't know what Loop is, it's an automated insulin delivery system currently for iPhone. The cleared version is for iPhone only. We are also working on an Android version, which we think is very important for equity and access issues, among many other great reasons. But it's a wonderful system that people love to use because it allows you to manage your diabetes directly from your phone, or in the case of the iOS version, directly from your Apple Watch. And I encourage you to take a look at our website if you'd like to learn more about how Loop works. Now, again, we are very open. We're very transparent. We did our entire 510K submission as hundreds and hundreds of Google Docs, which we then had to turn into PDFs because the agency can't access Google Docs. That's okay. We'll get there someday. But if you take a look at our website, you can actually take a look at not the entire submission, but almost all of the interactions that we had leading up to our 510K submission. And then I'm very proud to say it took a while to get there and we had a lot to work through, but on January 23rd of 2023, the FDA granted 510(k) clearance for Tide Pool Loop based on this community-led open source system, based on our open quality management system, based on that huge observational study that used real world data from people using the open source system. And again, just huge thanks to the FDA for being so flexible and wonderful to work with during that process. We got a lot of great press, a lot of great coverage because of this, and it's really opened some incredible doors for us. We're currently working on our CE marking and bringing it to the rest of the world. But I encourage you, if you want to learn more, to go check out our website. Tidepool.org/documents has all of the QSub meeting minutes leading up to our submission, and tidepool.org/open has links to all kinds of great resources, including the source code and including our open and openly available quality management system. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to take them. And there's my email address. All right, thanks so much.
Thank you. Wow. Howard. So I'm Bray Patrick Lake. I'm a digital health specialist at the Digital Health Center of Excellence here at the FDA. And I met Howard 2016. You were a White House 44 champion of change, known as Patient Data Liberator. And now look at us. I work at the agency and you have an FDA cleared technology born out of this movement from the patient community that we are not waiting. And you were a diabetes dad. You were not a medical product developer. I'm assuming at the time you didn't know anything about the FDA. Is that confirmed?
100% true. I knew nothing. And in 2013, I had my first meeting with the great folks at CDRH. And that's when I said, hey, I'm hoping we can do this crazy new way. If not, I'll go do something else. That's totally fine. But, great credit, big credit to Jeff Shuren and Bakul Patel and Stacy Beck and Courtney Elias, who all said, no. We need more innovators. We need more entrepreneurs. We want you to come do it this new way.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's so incredible how this story, because just historically on the patient engagement side, for those of you that haven't been fighting this battle to get patient voice front and center and use devices and share our data, this was going on for more than a decade, probably 15 years, very actively, and people were kind of losing their minds when this patient community went DIY and put stuff on GitHub, and then a few groups kind of blossomed out of that, and then here we are. That's one. Not only have you gone all the way through this regulatory cycle of the total product life cycle and development, you have also, you mentioned the pre-cert pilot, but now we're really focused on predetermined change control plans.
Mm-hmm.
And I encourage people to search FDA, look at our draft guidance for predetermined change control plans that are not only for AI ML enabled technologies, but also medical devices, because you've planned in flexibility really to bring in other devices and integrate different hardwares over time, which I just think that's what we're really hoping for, to grow and develop and change and facilitate innovation. So there's so much on your case study. Dime, I think, just posted this where you can actually go read more in the Dime case studies, but we have another 40 minutes to explore this, and so I'm going to come back to you. I'm going to go ahead and pull our other panelists in. So Katie Gagel, love it if you do just a bit of an intro and share a little bit about your experience as a type 2 patient.
Sure. Thank you so much. And thank you, Howard. That was incredible and inspiring in every way possible. My name is Katie Gagel, and I have lived with type 2 diabetes since 2008. And I was diagnosed it was so unexpected because I was actually going to see a physician for something completely different. And they had seen that my blood panel was a bit off. And so they said, you need to go see a primary care doctor and get that checked out. And so this was rural Western Kentucky. And so I said, okay. And so I did. And a nurse called me and she said, you have type 2 diabetes. I'm sending over a prescription. I'm going to send you a glucose meter. And you need to set up an appointment with a diabetes educator, a nutritionist. Do you have any questions? And I just kind of paused and I said, yeah, what is diabetes? And from that point forward, that really set the tone of really trying to figure out what diabetes was and how to care for myself. And a lot of my health journey was me being a non-compliant patient. To be quite honest, I felt overwhelmed. I felt frozen. I was depressed. I was anxious. It was so overwhelming to know that basically everything that I knew in my mind was, you have to change everything. You need to change your diet. You need to change your lifestyle. And that is so hard when you don't have a support, you don't have the community around you. And so I had to advocate for myself, and that was really challenging. To be quite honest, a lot of that time frame, I was over medicated. A lot of the medication I was given was helping my numbers. My A1C went down, but I felt I had chronic headaches. I had chronic gastrointestinal issues. And I was taking 11 medications and more at one time during that period of time. And it was all related to diabetes. It was related to high blood pressure, cholesterol. So these are all things that are related to blood sugars. And it was really challenging for me. I think for a long time, I felt like, why should I take care of myself? Because I still feel terrible. And in full transparency, a lot of that time was, I don't feel worthy to even be taken care of. I just, so much of that mental health aspect was tied into my care. And I saw multiple physicians. There were several times where I was told I would die young if I did not take care of myself. And I think what worried me was that I didn't care. And so that was a huge part of my journey. But in the summer of 2022, it was kind of the peak time of my blood sugar. It was, my A1C was 14%, the highest it had ever been. I was, again, on 11 medications, and I was denied a CGM twice, even though I knew that having that device would transform my life. But I was denied, so I had kind of given up on it. But in that fall, I had made a huge decision to change jobs because I needed to put my health first. I was experiencing a lot of the effects of not taking care of myself. And so I changed jobs, immediately changed insurance, and immediately received a CGM. That was January 2023. So again, I had a 14% A1C. In April, it dropped to 11.9%. So I started seeing immediate improvement, even though it was still really high. In August, I received my insulin pump of 2023. And then in October 2023, my A1C decreased to 6.7%. So, I mean, it's just undeniable. These devices changed my life, changed these numbers. But not only that, it decreased me being on 11 medications to 1 medication, to insulin, and that's all I take. All of my blood panels came back normal from that point forward. I've never had that happen. And I was able to decrease all the visits. I mean, I was seeing a physician, at least one physician every 3 months, and now that's to every 6 months. And I really think the power of having access to my data, being able to see that, like see, okay, in the course of 2 days, this is what it's been versus 1 month, and being able to see that improvement. And then I also found my voice. I mean, there were so many times being a patient, I didn't know I could speak up. I just trusted, and also just couldn't, I just didn't know I had that option to maybe push back or maybe challenge or maybe ask a lot more questions. And also having physicians that really rooted for me. That really made a huge difference. When I went into my physician's office in the fall of last year, my physician literally clapped for me. Like, he was so happy and I was so happy, and that made me proud of myself. So
I got to ask you, before this diagnosis, would you consider yourself a quantified selfer? Were you running around with smartwatches and monitoring your health? Or is this a new relationship with devices for you?
I had used Fitbits. I mean, I think, yeah, I had used wearables before. So it wasn't that I was not familiar, for sure. I just didn't, I think before I didn't know what to do with that data. I just
Right.
kind of liked looking at it, especially my sleep. So yeah, it was kind of familiar, but it wasn't new, for
Yeah.
sure.
Well, thank you for sharing. I think that's a great segue to pull Willem into the conversation from the TNO Research Organization in Netherlands. Willem, some of your research has been just really incredible. Your cohort, I think it is the Engage cohort with type 2 patients, and you know, so what we hear Katie's story, and she's mentioned, yeah, there's the A1C and there's the need to manage the insulin, but there's sleep, there's mental health, there's all these other things. And it seems like you've done quite a bit of work with the patient community on using PGHD and maybe even discovering some new biomarkers. Would you like to share a bit about that?
Yes. So what do you say after such a story, Katie? Because I think these are the stories that we need, and so also thank you for sharing this story. So I work as a scientist across the ocean, so to say, in the Netherlands, and we do a lot of work in lifestyle-related diseases, including type 2 diabetes mainly. And as Howard already showed, so there's 42 factors and even more factors that contribute to well, that was mostly type 1, but type 2, it's a similar story. So there's so many factors that contribute to that. So what you see is patient-generated health data can provide insights into that, and we have heard that over and over during this symposium. But what you also said, Katie, is that it can be kind of overwhelming. So our research is also dedicated to kind of make sense out of the data and also personalize that. So really helping people to get the information that they need at that time, at that moment. What we see is that if you do that right, then people are empowered to adhere to lifestyle changes, for example, to medication adherence. So this patient-generated health data is very important in our work. You're referring to the Engage project, where we said, hey, one of the things in diabetes is as we all know, the complications. So the macrovascular complications, blindness, renal complications, and all that. So let's start building a project around that and see whether we can develop measures that provide insights for patients, for healthcare professionals, and for whatever stakeholder needs that information in a way from a patient-generated health data perspective. But what we said is let's start with the meaningful aspects of health. So the DIME framework has been very useful to us. So what we said, let's start with the meaningful aspects of health. And for the diabetes, a lot is known about meaningful aspects of health, but we said, let's do it and let's look into different groups regarding socioeconomical status. And what we found out, and it's actually not surprising, is that people with a lower socioeconomic status, they actually don't care about long-term complications. They care about their financial stress. They care about the daily stress that they have in their life. They care maybe about their diet or not being allowed to eat certain things. So that was a very different perspective than we saw in the people with high socioeconomic status. So what we figured is that in the project that we really need to also personalize the measurements. And in this case, we wanted to use these meaningful aspects of health and derive measures from that to really allow people to really empower people to self-manage their health. So if you would say, hey, long-term complications are important because that is something meaningful for the whole population, and you would target someone with low socioeconomic status, it wouldn't help because they are bothered about different things. So that is, yeah, well, we do a lot of research in this area, actually utilizing patient generated health data, empowering people with diabetes to manage their health.
Yeah, just what you're talking about. So starting with the meaningful aspects of health, I think in diabetes, and certainly the meetings I've attended, I've heard a number of patients say there's so much more to this than A1C. And yes, that's important. And yes, it's associated with comorbidities in the future, but we care so much more about living. And even Howard, your community, having a kid that probably wanted to go to college, live independently, sleep through the night safely, without needing mom and dad there. But I think, if you pull all this together and we're you're looking at, here's these devices and technologies that can basically capture what's most important to patients, but we have to be able to do something with that. And so in the clinical trial space, maybe that leads to, novel trial designs where you have a primary endpoint, but then, maybe a secondary that could be selected that's most meaningful to patients, which would probably be some kind of surrogate. So I don't want to stir that up during this panel necessarily, but I think we should also talk about this data, and patients have their data and then they want to do something with it. So would anybody like to share your perspectives on the current state of, how interoperable this is? Is this getting pulled into the clinical encounter in EHR? And if so, how effectively it's being used in these clinician-patient interactions?
Sure, I'd definitely love to address that. I want to pop back just for a second because I think both Katie and Willem touched on something that I think is really important. Katie, it breaks my heart to hear you say I was non-compliant. And when we talk about compliance and adherence, I encourage us as people in the community innovating and making a difference. It's not on the patient. Like I just don't like the terms non-compliance and adherence. And I think often healthcare providers use those terms as weapons of shame with patients, when really the issue is us. It's like, if you're designing a device, if you're designing an intervention, it is on us to make sure that it is easy to follow that intervention, easy to use that device. And so mental health and the burden of managing diabetes is the primary thing that we need to be concerned with. And that's what will lead to patients feeling better about being empowered to use the data to manage their own condition. To your question, Bray, absolutely. One of the big things we did during the pandemic, I mentioned this enterprise tier that we built called Tidepool Plus, is we enabled EHR integration of all of the data in Tidepool and the reports. But we also make it very clear that when a clinic adds a patient to their Tidepool dashboard, we encourage them to invite that patient to claim their account, because we feel really, really strongly that, diabetes is a disease that you manage 99.9% of the time on your own at home. And so, yes, the clinician can get access to the data through the EHR at whatever granularity they want, including individual data points. But what really matters is when the patient can engage with their own data at home, because it's a self-managed disease at the end of the day. So reducing the burden and making it easier to do that is the name of the game.
Yeah. So CDRH had an open comment for people living with type 2 earlier this year. And we got some comments about, one, not being able to get access to CGM, which I think, Katie, you just amplified that. But then also the expectations around what happens to this data. So the patient's now engaging with this data, and then you go into your healthcare encounter. And some patients felt like they thought they were being monitored in real time because they assumed the data was going into their record, but then they found out that wasn't the case. So Katie, do you have anything to share on that?
Yes, I was surprised. I was surprised because what you described is correct. You think because it's collecting continuous data that your physician is actually looking at it. And in my mind, logically, I know that is not probably feasible, but it was very frustrating and has been very frustrating to go to an office and see them in real time looking at my data. And although it's been very positive recently, it has been kind of difficult to know that it's available. It's right there this whole time. But I only get that feedback in in real time for that 10-minute slot that I have with my endocrinologist. And that can be really challenging, especially because I think it's meaningful data, and it's something that like I can bring questions to, and vice versa. So yeah, that is definitely been a challenge.
Well, as your moderator, I'm not going to offer an opinion on that, but thank you for sharing that information. Let's talk a little bit about, so you've got this data and you want to do something with it. Howard, like I continue to be impressed with the tools that are open source on your website, and just going through different things, and it seems really easy to share data. So I'd love to hear your perspective on that. And then Willem, I'd love to hear your perspective on the research side and what you do, to keep your data safe and keep the data flowing and make sure that there's value to participants in your research.
So again, one of the blessing in disguise of the pandemic is that it enabled this. It enabled data to be shared between healthcare providers and clinicians. It made it normal to do Zoom encounters or remote telemedicine encounters with whatever tool. And we've seen a huge increase in the use of our tools with providers giving care remotely to their patients. We actually launched an entire telemedicine initiative during the pandemic for exactly that reason. We also see many more providers, and I hope this continues to grow, moving from that model of, oh, we'll see you as a patient once every 3 or 4 months to, hey, you know what, we're actually going to check in on you every day, and we may give you a call to see how things are going. And there are some incredible providers that do weekly support groups with their patients, and providers that actually are looking for the challenges. So our population management dashboard, for example, makes it possible for providers to say, which of my patients are struggling with nighttime hypoglycemia, low blood sugars at night, or which of my patients really aren't taking advantage of their CGM, like getting supplies to you on a regular basis for your CGM or for your insulin turns out to be a huge challenge for a whole lot of people. And so providers can see that that's happening in the data and actually make a call and say, hey, how can I help you get access to that? It's reducing the burden at the end of the day is really what it's all about.
All right, well, you're a researcher. You need data to research on. How are you going to do this?
Yeah, so as a researcher, we need the data. Huh? So that is when we last year we did a research actually to identify the key values for people with disease, with chronic disease, to share their data and what are the conditions, and that was quite interesting to see, because how we are looking into chronic lifestyle related diseases. So typically people were on average older than the average population. I think it was on average 65 years. And we've heard before that older people are less tech savvy than younger people, but this was actually quite an active population. So that was quite surprising for us to see that there's a lot of willingness to contribute to data collection, to generate data and to share that actually with researchers. But there's a few key values that need to be adhered to, and number one is trust. So we need to make sure that people that share their data, I mean, it's sensitive data, it's data about your daily life, on how you behave, on whom you are. So people need to trust us as researchers, and that's key. That's number one. And then obviously related to that, data security, privacy, and those kind of aspects are important. And one of the things that was also mentioned, and I also hear it here, is that insight. So being able to access your own data is crucial to kind of be continuously engaged in sharing your data and with researchers. So that was very important for us to learn, because if we want to kind of create a group of people to share their data for research purposes, then we need to provide insights. So that there need to be some sort of incentive to that. So that was very important for us to see. And another thing I want to mention is data quality, because often what you see, we do work with a lot of remote patient monitoring data as well. And what you see is that a lot of people, they start monitoring themselves, but if it's not crucial anymore from a clinical perspective, I mean, why would you continue monitoring if it's only for research purposes? So that's also something. So we need to keep people engaged, continuously monitoring their health if it's for research purposes. So how do we do that? And I think those aspects, trust, insights, data security, they are crucial to make sure that we can do so.
Thank you. Katie, do you have anything to add to that?
I think about, it's been brought up several times about patient burden. And I think like one of the biggest things that I keep coming back to is what are the solutions and how are we treating the whole patient? Like I see an ophthalmologist, I see an endocrinologist, I see even my dentist, podiatrist, I see all of these physicians that are all related to diabetes care. And so I think about, especially for me, I have a really terrible memory. So when a physician is asking me, well, what did your podiatrist say? Because I don't see their notes. And that burden is so heavy to carry as a patient, to have to know every single medication, every single detail of what was said to me. And I think a lot of it too is the language that we use with patients. Oftentimes I don't quite understand exactly what's being said to me either. So I'm wondering and just keep coming back to, how are we shifting to like systems and technology and devices to not only just collect data, but also to have this communication too, where it becomes less burden for me to carry and for patients in general to carry along, and more so, use the usage of technology and devices to help patients in care.
You know if your system is using open notes?
I don't know. I'm not sure.
Okay.
I'm writing it down.
Yeah, I think that's an initiative that was, patients have been calling for, and definitely part of interoperability and increasing, access to health information. So parking lot that, maybe check into it.
Okay. Love that.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. So we have still a ton to explore, I think, in this session. And so we're basically taking the patient experience, and then what I think is so powerful and promising is basically we're learning about the lived experience outside the clinic, right? And then we're also learning about what is important to patients, and then measuring what matters. We need to bring that into research and then into product development. And Howard, I have to throw this back to you, because I think so many times in med tech, you might see a startup or a company they've made a thing and then they go looking for, it's a hammer looking for the nail, and yours was completely organic and opposite, and you got through the regulatory process for at least one clearance so far, and then future potential. But can you talk a little bit about kind of like maybe the total product life cycle and how you're looking at this now, because it's not linear, and then you also get to use real world evidence, and I would love to, and maybe you have data on this, instead of going and trying to design and accrue a clinical trial, you went because patients already had a value in sharing their data. And then I assume you consented them for your study, and then the data package that went to FDA. So that's a real shift. And would you like to just share a little bit about how that works and this more organic patient ground up?
Yeah, I think the story there is all about what in the diabetes community became known as the "we are not waiting" movement. And this is a group of patients that said, hey, it is taking way too long to get solutions to help me or my child that I know are possible based on today's existing technology. So we're just going to go do it. And we saw this with the Night Scout project in 2013, 2014, which John Kostick reverse engineered the Dexcom G4 receiver to get blood CGM data for his son, and then shared what he did with the community. We saw it again with the Open APS project, where Dana Lewis and Scott Librand built a system. We saw Ben West reverse engineered the Medtronic insulin pump. And so I think the first thing we can do is look at all these systems. And then, of course, Loop, which we took advantage of, where Pete Schwam and Nate Rackliff built a system that ultimately turned into Loop. The biggest thing we can do is not be scared of things like the We Are Not Waiting movement. I think when it originally happened, the FDA was like, whoa, this is a problem. People are reverse engineering things and they're sharing their ideas online. And definitely the industry was like, wait, this is not good. People are using our devices off-label in ways we didn't intend. And everybody had a freak out moment. And I think the lesson to be learned is this isn't a freak out moment. This is a moment to embrace. We need more of this, not less of this. We need to find those patients that are innovating, that are creating their own solutions. And we need to say, hey, what can we give them so that they can do even more? Because they're leading the way. The We Are Not Waiting movement, the do-it-yourself community, is the leading edge of diabetes innovation. And we should be embracing that and encouraging that. And I still think there's more to be done with companies making access to the data from their devices available. The example I love to give is when I step on my bathroom scale, the weight that it shows me, that's my weight, right? I wouldn't, for a second, nobody would say, oh, the bathroom scale company owns that weight and can keep it locked in their proprietary silo. When I take my temperature with a thermometer, the thermometer company doesn't get to say, hey, we're going to lock that temperature reading in our secure cloud system, and we're going to only give you access to it if you're a registered developer. Like, come on. Blood glucose data is no different. Insulin delivery data is no different. A syringe company doesn't get to say, we own the data of how much insulin you put in your body. So those are the kinds of things on top of interoperable systems, which are known technologies, in order to actually enable the kind of innovation that we saw in the We Are Not Waiting movement. I know I went a little different than the question you asked, but I actually think that is the important point there.
Go. And I think it's such an interesting thing, and Willem, maybe you have an opinion on this, but in research, we're like, oh, people can't look at their data because they're blinded, and they might, what if they're going to go change their weight based on this? Or I was part of a migraine trial where you had to have a certain number of days to screen in. And this was before, any people using PGHD to actually objectively identify headache. It was all patient self-report. Well, guess how many people reported because they want to be in the trial? And then what happens, when you're randomized to an intervention, you're trying to see, therapeutic change over time if you actually didn't have the right number of days to qualify for a trial. So I think there's just so much to be learned. And what I hear you saying is like, patients want their data, patients can handle their data, and we need to figure it out. Willem, any reaction
Exactly.
to that as future?
No, I agree, and it's all about, like, do you also feel engaged with the researcher? So what do you do it for? Is it do you do it for the researcher? How do you share your data for the researcher, or do you also do it for yourself? And what we see, and when we did this research among people with chronic disease, there's a lot of solidarity and a lot of wish to share that data. So if we can do this together, one of the things was that we do wish to be part of also designing the research and defining the research question. So if it's co-creation, co-research, I mean, why would you change your numbers if you are also part of the research and part of the design of the research? So I think that's very important to have people with disease actually fully involved in also the research part.
I think in our opening session, Grace Cordovano made a call to action, and then also said, hey, we need to get this into the budget because it needs to be part of what we do to co-create. So how do you navigate that? Do you have extra funds, or how do you plan that into your budgets for the co-creative piece?
That's a very good question. What we see in the Netherlands, at least, is that there's at nation level, there's more and more recognition of that. It's sometimes it's also becoming obligatory to have people with disease involved in the design of your research, and there's more and more funds becoming available to do so. And I think that's very important because, well, as was pointed out in the opening session, I mean, it's hard work to do. So you cannot do that pro bono.
Thank you. So we're not quite to the end of the session, but we're headed into the home stretch, and I'm wondering, does anybody have a burning thought that, like, I just haven't pulled you in or gotten back to?
Well, there's a great question in Q&A I'd love to address if that's okay.
Yeah, go for it.
Kelly Westman asked if someone dies as a result of jury rigging a medical device, who will feel the impact? I'm interested in innovation, but please comment on this. And I think it's a wonderful question, and I think it comes up all the time because I think this is at the root of why the diabetes device industry and also the agency is worried at times about the do-it-yourself innovation community. What if people do something that's dangerous? So here's the thing. Diabetes is dangerous as it is. Insulin is a deadly hormone as it is. If someone draws too much insulin into a syringe and gives themselves an overdose of insulin, we don't blame the syringe company. We don't say, oh, that syringe should have prevented that person from doing that. People take charge of their own care all the time. And the do-it-yourself, we are not waiting community is an example of people taking charge of their own care. And I think we need to embrace that. I think it's a little paternalistic of us to say we need to put all the guardrails and all the safety things so that people can't ever do anything on their own that they think is better for their care. We need to trust patients who do want to take charge of their own care and innovate, because that's how things get better. That's how things improve. And it happens all the time. I've had people at the FDA say to me, I use this device off-label, I use this drug off-label, and it's okay for me to do that. So I think thinking that we can put guardrails around that is a problem, but this is at the heart of why people are worried about this kind of innovation, because the medical device company is worried that they will be held responsible and accountable. So to me, the answer is enable it. I love the idea of the innovation switch or the innovation opt-in, where you say as a patient, I get that I'm doing something that is outside the bounds of what this device was designed for, and it hasn't been tested for this, but I'm okay with this, and that's on me.
Can we just throw this on there? So the manufacturers or companies that don't let patients have their data, what would you say to them, and or what do you see as some of those primary challenges and fears?
I would simply say, stop it. It's not your data. The patient owns their own data. I would go back to my, bathroom scale or thermometer example. Like, if my body is generating data, that data is there whether your device extracted it or not. If your device happens to be the one that is attached to my body and you are measuring the thing that my body is generating, it is, I believe, an obligation for you to make that data available to the person living with the condition.
Thank you. Katie?
Yeah, when I think about data, and I of course only speak for myself. I think when I think about the overall management of care for diabetes, the data and privacy is always at the bottom for me, because even though I think it's greatly important, of course, but for me, like if it's working and it's doing really positive things for me, I think I'm prioritizing higher things as a patient to be the most concerned. And maybe I put too much trust in, but for me, as a patient, I think that's what I think about when I think about data privacy. Again, very important, but when I'm also thinking about taking care of my life, it tends to be lower for me.
Thank you. All right, we'll go to Willem and then we'll close it out with Howard. Willem, so what last thought would you like to leave our our audience with, and working with PGHD and the team sport of research and innovation partnership with patients?
Yeah, so from a research perspective, so what we do now, what we have now, we've continuous glucose monitoring. We have data from watches. We have, well, tons of data, and there's so much hidden insights in all that data. So if we can organize it in such a way that we can make use of that data to improve care, to improve insights, to empower people with diabetes to cope with the disease, to better self-manage, I think we have a bright future.
Thank you. And Howard.
Several quick messages to the people on regulatory teams and at startups or big companies who are innovating. Don't be afraid to think outside the box. We had an incredible experience working with the agency and doing things differently. To the medical device companies that are here, please make the data available to the patients using your devices in real time through well understood secure mechanisms, secure REST APIs from your cloud APIs, and secure device communication with security and authentication layers to your device. And then to the patients, push back on your healthcare providers and make it clear that mental health comes first and reducing the burden comes first. Please don't let your provider get away with saying you're non-compliant. That's just not okay. Say, give me a better intervention that makes it easier to manage the condition I've got, and that's on you. So thanks to everyone for being here.
Thank you for the wisdom and for all the inspiration. And Howard, I'm just, keep going. It's been so exciting. All right. Thank you, everybody. I've loved being part of this session. And Jackie, I will turn it back to you.
Thank you, Bray, for moderating this discussion on patient-generated health data and diabetes. Our goal was to illustrate how patient-generated health data can bring together industry sponsors, regulators, academics, and most importantly, patients to foster innovative device developments. This session definitely fulfilled that promise. Thank you, Howard, for the case example and speakers for your incredible discussion.